Welcome back to the 1070 Architecture YouTube show. Today, we're going to be talking about the current state of the San Diego housing market. We're then going to be exploring creative ways for older millennials, Gen Z, but pretty much anyone to enter into the market. Of course, I am joined by the principal architect of 1070 Architecture, Sean Canning, who has a lot of experience entering into the housing market in creative ways. So, Sean, why don't you just tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about this conversation, and then we'll just jump right into it.
Morning, Bailey. Thanks for hosting this. One of the things as an architect that I'm always wondering is how does the younger generation, or really anybody who's not already in the housing market, how do they get into the housing market in San Diego? Because as of 2025, the average home price in San Diego is $928,000, an enormous chunk of change. How would somebody like you buy a home in San Diego? Is it even a possibility anymore? This has huge implications for San Diego because if people can't buy homes here, they're going to end up living further and further away from the core of San Diego, the downtown core, and then they're going to commute in, which has the ripple effect of implications.
Two important statistics to set the stage for where the housing market currently is the fact that I was listening to this podcast recently where they were talking about this, and they were saying that nationwide in America right now, the average age of a home buyer is 56 years old. So, of course, that's just the averages. So, there's younger people, there's older people. But I think that's important because we mostly, for example, I'm 27, people think of probably starting right around my age to maybe 35 as being like the prime first time home buying years. It's now become something where you need to be a lot more established in your career and have had many years to accumulate more money, more net worth to be able to afford a home. And then also in the year 1950, in California in particular, I have it in front of me here, it was the cost to buy a home in California was $9,564. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $117,000. Based on the number you just gave of just under a million, that means the inflation within the housing market since 1950, it's nearly 10x above inflation, essentially. So even 10 years ago, this conversation would be much different. Sean, why don't you talk a little bit about how you kind of view the current state of the housing market, and then, of course, transition into how you've approached entering into the housing market? Because at this point, you've bought multiple properties in San Diego.
Yeah, so we own three properties at the moment in San Diego. We own a single family home where we live in Logan Heights, and then we have a 3 unit rental property in Logan Heights, which was actually the first property we bought, which I'll show you in a second. And then we own a second property in Barrio Logan, which has 3 rental units. We've not purchased any of these for more than $500,000. That's like 50% of the average cost right now. And each of them, we've used creative solutions to end up owning the properties. I think San Diego is like one of the top three, if not top five, most challenging housing markets in the country right now. I think you have to come with a little bit of a different angle if you're going to end up in a home here. And most of what we'll talk about today is not the type of thing a real estate agent would tell you, but more of like the ideas of an architect. So I guess I should like also qualify what I'm about to say. I'm not a real estate professional, I'm an architect. So the ideas are coming from that direction. Let me tell you a little bit about the first home we purchased. This was the first house we bought here. It's in Logan Heights, which at the time we purchased this home in 2016. So I was 30 years old when we purchased this. When I was about your age is when I started to really think about how I could get a home. So you can see in the greater context of San Diego where this is, it's considered Southeast San Diego. So here's downtown San Diego. And we're about, I don't know, 2 or 3 miles from downtown San Diego. At the time we purchased this home, this was considered like a risky neighborhood to buy in. And in the last 9 years, it's improved significantly. There's still some challenges with this area, but for the most part, it's improved significantly. Okay, so this is what the house looked like. This is what the house looks like right now, or before we built an ADU in the front of it. And we got lucky. We actually found a duplex that was listed for $335,000, which is like, sounds like an insane price 9 years later, but I guess it just goes to show, where things were in 2016 when we bought this house. The house, we just painted the front, changed the door, the windows, added some signage, built a fence, and then this mural came later. But it's the unit in the back, which is where we ended up living. So we ended up buying this house with an FHA loan. We put 3.5% down on a home that ultimately sold for $327,500 because we were able to negotiate with the seller a little bit. And at the time when we bought this house, the housing market was so competitive that we basically purchased this house without. My wife Margaret had never even seen the house before. The most important thing was that the house was in a livable condition because otherwise you can't get a loan for the house. So we needed to find something that was a single unit or ideally two units, but to be honest, that felt like a little bit of a pipe dream at the time. We wanted to make sure that the house was in good enough condition that the bank would give you a loan. If the house is not in good enough condition, then you're going to end up having to pay cash, and we didn't have $327,000 of cash. This is the floor plan we ultimately worked out here. The house. This is a little bit of an explanation of how it worked. So we lived in this unit and we rented this unit. And when we purchased the house, this is actually how it looked right here. It was actually 327 and a half. And this was the renovation work we did, the back unit. Probably spent about $80,000 renovating that back unit. A lot of the work Margaret and I did ourselves to keep the cost down. And this is what it ultimately appraised for when we finished. So again, we were living in the back, we were renting the front. Our mortgage payment been about $3,000 at the time. The unit in the front, I think, was renting for like $1,500. So this was a great deal. And at that time, we actually had a 3.5% interest rate, which I didn't even realize how important it was at the time. This is us doing a lot of the work ourselves. We did our own insulation. We built all the cabinetry in the kitchen, installed all the appliances ourselves. And basically, this is how it looked when it was finished. This is now a rental unit for us. This was a 1925 bungalow, which was renovated to be minimalist on the interior, but you can see we kept some of the original framing. Those were the original ceiling joists from 1925. They're all redwood. We built all of this stuff in the bathroom ourselves, all the cabinets ourselves. For a long time, we lived in the house when it was unfinished. So that's another interesting angle. If the home is livable and you're doing a renovation on part of it, or all of it in this case, there's actually nothing stopping you from living there during the renovation. But that was like a sacrifice we had to make on our first home. So this was the unit that was fully renovated, and this is the addition that was done in 1985, where the second unit was. And there's another photo of how it looked. And then later on, the mural came. We rescued the mural that you see here. And ultimately, we ended up building an ADU in the front here. We purchased this for $327,500. We put 3.5% down, which would have been under $12,000 to get the home. We had about probably $20,000 in savings to start the renovation. And my parents gave us a housewarming gift. At the time, Margaret and I had been together for like 12 years, and it didn't look like we were going to get married. So my parents, instead of a wedding gift, they gave us a housewarming gift of $40,000. So we had about $60,000 to complete the renovations. And it took us a whole year to renovate the house. And we saved up about another $20,000. And then we used that $20,000 to pay off the remaining of the house renovation. And also we had put a lot of the construction projects on our credit cards, so then we were paying those off at the end. The tenants that we had in front were the same tenants that were there when we purchased the house. So all in all, it was a pretty good deal at the time, but in 2016, when we bought the house, we were very concerned that we were not going to be able to afford the mortgage payment, which, if you look back at things, that sounds crazy, but it was a big investment for us. And we basically did everything we could to make ends meet on that house.
It sounds like a fairly risky investment, I would say. Like you were all in on this.
We were all in, but I think oftentimes when you're buying your first home, you kind of have to be all in because what's the other option? My logic was like I wanted to get into that bottom rung of the real estate ladder because from that point, you can then use the equity you gain in the home, whether that's by paying off your mortgage over a decade or so, or whether the property increases in value, or whether you're starting to generate equity, which you can then trade up into the real estate market. So I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today is getting onto the bottom rung of the real estate market. And I suppose there may be an alternate theory, like just rent all the time and never jump into the real estate market. But as architects, it was important for us to own our own property.
Plus, in your situation, not just the fact that you're an architect and you had development plans for the lot. So it wasn't like you were just buying a home to live in. You had investment ideas for it. And then also the fact that you and Margaret as well could save a lot of the money being able to do a lot of the general contractor type labor.
Yeah, and not everybody would be able to do that, but I think, like, let's say you are the type of person who's not very handy. There's a lot of things you can still do. If you're ambitious enough to do this, like, you can go on YouTube, figure out how to install LVP flooring or click linoleum tile flooring. It's very easy to do. And this is a way you can, like, improve the house because most of the homes we'll look at today are probably in the condition where you're going to buy it, but you're going to have to make improvements as you live there. Let's jump into Zillow and see what's on the market right now. And then we'll use these as real examples to see if these are things that you could afford or even if you'd be willing to do these types of projects.
Okay. You'll pull up the screen share of the Zillow properties. What neighborhoods are we going to be looking in? Are we going to be looking at North Park?
North Park is out of your price range.
Damn. That's I think that's one of the top neighborhoods in San Diego.
Yeah, North Park is a great area. And for somebody your age to live in North Park would be like unbelievable. But you're a renter in North Park, not a property owner in North Park. Let me explain how I kind of set up my Zillow here. So I've basically used San Diego as the nucleus, city of San Diego, limited the cost of a home up to $600,000. And I've sorted the home type by houses and multifamily. So not going to put all of the lots and lands generally. I'm also not a fan of condos because of the high HOA fee. Some of the HOA fees on condos are like $600 or $700 a month. And I don't know if it's just because I'm an architect, but I don't like somebody telling me what I could or couldn't do with the I live. So I'm kind of anti HOA. That's why I'm not using any condos. So everything here is going to be a house that you can purchase and own. The next thing is you need to figure out like generally where you're going to live. This entire coast here, these are beautiful areas, but these are not areas where a first-time home buyer is going to be able to purchase a home. So I like to think of this as trying to get as close to downtown as possible. So this is downtown and the neighborhood that,
That's what I was going to say as well.
yeah, I can walk downtown from my home. I live right here, right now. The first home we bought was over here. Our other property is over here. So everything is walkable to downtown. And Logan Heights is here. Barrio Logan is here. I would also recommend you stay east of Route 5. Everything that's west of Route 5 is part of the coastal zone. And if you have to get a permit for anything that we're going to talk about today, that's like a $30,000 12-month permit. And you don't want to have to do that if you don't have to. So I would generally recommend you stay east of Route 5.
What types of home renovation remodeling work would trigger the need for a coastal development permit? Personally, someone who's not handy, which I think is probably the majority of people, that wouldn't necessarily be a deal breaker, especially if I'm just trying to prioritize getting into the housing market in a solid location for basically as cheap as possible.
Well, if you're in the coastal zone and you're going to do like an addition, a large addition, that would trigger a coastal development permit. If you're closer to the water, then an ADU could trigger a coastal development permit. But generally, if you're doing an interior remodel, you would be exempt your opportunities. The coastal zone, in my opinion, is for at least a middle level developer or middle level home purchaser. It's just not the easy developments that we're looking for in your scenario and you representing your whole generation.
All right.
So look at these two properties here. We have a $600,000 property in Logan Heights. We have a $550,000 property in Grant Hill. Grant Hill is a nicer neighborhood. We'll take a look at those in a second. You could also come down here to Mountain View or Southcrest, although this is not as nice of a neighborhood. If you go out to Emerald Hills, it's kind of hit or miss and kind of hit or miss. And the further out here you get, the further you're going to be commuting. So you're going to be kind of like compromising your quality of life or maybe putting more money into your car. Ideally, we'd be a little closer over here. But I do want to point out, besides San Diego, you also have La Mesa, Lemon Grove, and Chula Vista as options. Let's take a look at some of these ones and see what you would be able to do here.
Zoom in a bit more towards the downtown options because I think I speak for most people my generation. Like I live in Denver, for example, now in a very walkable, mixed use environment where I can walk everywhere. I rarely use my car during the week, and there's like coffee shops, bars, restaurants, all within walking distance. So that is what I would want to replicate here. I do think it's important also to state here that San Diego does not have a very good public transportation system the way a city like New York or Paris or Chicago, places where you can just like get on a train and like easily get in. With San Diego, it's especially most places in California, it's car culture.
Yeah, both of these, there's really no major mass transit. I mean, there is a trolley line that you can see here that goes down Commercial. It's really limited on the stops. But both of these areas, you can walk to different shops or breweries The further you get over here, the less walking you'd want to do because the neighborhood is not as nice. Grant Hill would be ideal, aside from the fact that it's on the top of a hill. So there's going to be some up and down walking.
Let's check out this Grant Hill place.
Yeah, when I'm looking at this one, 550 for Grand Hill, I'm like, oh man, like this thing is sounding pretty good right now. But let's see why it's only 550 here. I would say, by the way, Grant Hill, I think is the most valued neighborhood in San Diego. It's a very small pocket neighborhood. San Diego is the city of neighborhoods, so every like area has like all these like micro neighborhoods. See, it's a one bedroom, one bath at 736 square feet, and it's on Island Ave, which is generally a really nice area to live. You could look in these photos and you can see that somebody did a pretty nice renovation. The interior space looks pretty modern, flooring looks pretty good, kitchen looks really nice. So there wouldn't be a lot of work for you to do if you were to buy something like this.
I was expecting a disaster for the price point. This is very nice.
It is surprisingly nice on the inside, which sometimes leads me to believe that this home was flipped. And, I have opinions about flippers and how they generally detract value from properties. But it does look really nice. And you can see like there's a lot of modern details. So, this could have actually been done by somebody with a little bit of a design sensibility. It looks like this is a staircase here. And here's the staircase. So I think what they did here with this one bedroom is I think they put the bedroom upstairs and then all of the public spaces downstairs, living room, kitchen, dining room. There's an attic here, very small backyard, little exterior space, which is nice. And then see, here's the view you get from Hill, and you can actually see all the way down to the Coronado Bridge.
Okay.
Let's dive in a little bit more and try to figure out what's going on here.
Yeah, because I feel like something's up. Something's wrong as to why this one is so cheap. I mean, it's the only one in the general vicinity that is.
Well, first thing, if it's got interior photos, that means you can probably get a loan on it. If there's no interior photos on the listing, that means the interior is not looking good and you're probably gonna have to pay cash. So something without interior photos, you might want to follow up with the agent. Looking at
Yeah.
this, I'm seeing, okay, this house has got to get painted. Would you be willing to paint the exterior of this home if you owned it?
I will say I'm not a fan of this exterior at all. It's not just the color, but yeah, I mean, I could live with it, all things considered. And I do think I could paint it for sure.
So right there, you could add a ton of value to this home. Now here I'm seeing that there's a garage, which means that there's a play here for a future ADU here within this garage. And that would generally be your lowest cost option for an ADU. The biggest expense is you'd have to add some plumbing for your bathroom and kitchen. But other than that, that could become a future rental unit. And then the other thing I should point out here is that we can zoom in and we should be able to see the lot lines. Yeah. So this is the reason why this property is so inexpensive is look how small the lot is. So that's that's unfortunate because you don't have the backyard space in the future to then build an ADU like 5 years later, which would help offset your rent. And I think it's a great idea to do, but you don't have the opportunity here. You do have the opportunity to convert that garage, but that's about it. And if you did convert the garage, you're going to be doing street parking. But I think that's a compromise I would make on something like this. So now let's jump into the how much you'd actually have to pay for this thing. So on Zillow, if you come down over here and you click on this, you can actually like run the numbers yourself. If you were to put 20% down on this home, that would be $110,000. Your interest rate is actually probably going to be 7%. This is what you'd be paying every month. As a first-time home buyer, there's a couple things wrong with this. First off, you probably don't have $110,000 sitting in the bank. So that's the first thing. What I'm going to recommend is you put 3.5% down. There's three different strategies for down payments. Down is going to get you an FHA loan. That's your lowest amount you can put down unless you're like a veteran, in which case you can put zero down. But generally, it's going to be 3.5% is your lowest. After that, you can put 5% down. That's considered a conventional loan. If you could put 20% down, there's advantages to that. Let me get into this a little bit more here. At 3.5% down, you're going to be paying this mortgage insurance per month, basically ensuring the bank that you're going to make payments because you have so little down in the property. Now, if you put 5% down, you're still going to have that mortgage insurance. It's just going to drop a little bit more. But if you were to put 20% down, and this is why a lot of people talk about putting 20% down, watch what happens to the mortgage insurance here. You can see it disappears. Because at this point, the bank is like, you have enough equity. We're going to trust that you're going to make the rest of the payments at this point. If you put 3.5% down, as you're making these payments and eventually you get up to 20% equity, the PMI insurance is never going to leave the property. But if you put 5% down and get the conventional loan, you're building equity. Once you hit 20% equity, this will automatically disappear. So usually it's better to put the 5% down than the 3% down if you can. But the other angle here is if the interest rates dip below 7%, like let's say they hit 6 or even 5% again, you're going to refinance. And at that point, you would refinance with 5% down at a lower interest rate. And by that time, the home is probably up in value. So at 7% interest rate, I wouldn't have an issue. Only 3.5 down. Set this back to 550, and then we'll talk about if this is reasonable for you to afford. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like right now if you were to buy that property. Did I do that right? The home was 550. We're going to put 3.5% down, 7% interest. So you can see you're still going to have a really steep payment here. So we need to find a way to reduce this payment for you because $4,700 is probably double what you're paying for rent right now, right?
Yeah, it's like triple what I'm paying.
Triple what you're paying.
$4,700 is more than my monthly expenses, everything combined, unless something comes up.
And at the end of the day, this is just a one bedroom, one bathroom home. This is probably pretty unrealistic. I was actually running some numbers before this podcast here, and I wanted to make a couple suggestions. So the first thing is the general recommendation is that you put only 28% of your income into your housing. So if this is 28% of your income, you're making a ton of money. The best recommendation that I can give you, and the way I was able to make this work, is I had a significant other who was able to split this payment with me. Our income is, we have two incomes, which contributes to the money we bring in. And then 28% of both of our incomes is basically double what you have double income if you have a second person. So that could be a significant other. It could be a parent who's willing to help you out with this. It could be a partner, basically, almost like a roommate who's like a partner in the property. I don't think this is a good property because ultimately it's a one bedroom, one bath, and there is some opportunity for the future ADU, but the price is just too high here. So let's abandon this one and take a look at the other one. What are your thoughts so far, Billy? These numbers look pretty high to you?
They look pretty high to me, but I knew going in all these numbers would be high. Quite honestly, I don't think it's the worst idea. I feel like all things considered, the location, the interior, the cost wasn't unreasonable. You could still get one ADU, which I think is probably gonna be sufficient for most people if they want to go down that route. Although, of course, if you had the opportunity to build two or even three, that would be better. I do like how it's across the street from a very large park, it seems. I think that compensates for the lack of backyard space. All things considered, it was fairly solid.
This is a great area. We think this is the best views in the whole city from the top of this park. And generally, there's not a lot of homeless in this area, so that's great too. Let's take a look at this one. So the location is not as good, and the price is $50,000 higher. So let's see why. Okay, so this one, we got 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. So immediately there's a roommate opportunity here, which is going to help offset your rent. It's 1,000 square feet. We could look at the house. It's fairly straightforward. So if any repairs are needed, they should be pretty easy to do. You can see right away the kitchen is not as nice as the other kitchen.
Yeah, you're gonna need to remodel the kitchen.
Well, you remodel it as you go. You want to buy something now that's workable. And then at some point, a year or 2 years down the line, you commit to renovating the kitchen. And then once you do that, you've added some value into the home. But the thing I like about this is the bedroom count and the bathroom count. I don't think there will be a floor plan on this one. And look at this. So this is probably a 25-foot wide lot. It probably has alley access, which means you can fit 2 to 3 parking spaces in the back. Room for 1 or 2 ADUs in the future. You have a backyard space, so you can entertain your guests outside. And with the 3 bedroom, 2 bath, it would be pretty easy to house hack this and convert it into 2 units. And that's going to help significantly in offsetting your rent. Let's dive into the numbers on this one, though.
This one certainly has more development opportunity, unquestionably. The other one we looked at, I feel like is much more of a buy it, move in, and you're pretty much good.
hmm So this one's going to come with years of projects that you're going to do or you're going to pay for, but I still think there could be an opportunity here. So let's just see how much of an opportunity there would be. 20% down, you would pay $120,000. If you put 3.5% down, you're paying $5,100. If you made $90,000 a year and you have a significant other who also makes $90,000 a year, 28% be $4,200 a month. This is still above the recommended amount that you would pay if you guys both made $90,000. Now, I would bet you in San Diego, people are paying more than the 28% of their income to housing, but this is certainly going to be a stretch. But let's just keep working these numbers and see if we could figure out a solution here. You're going to need to put $21,000 down. Your first goal where you are right now is to save as much as you can over the next 3 years or so. And I think you should probably try to save, $25,000 or $30,000. The more money you have, the easier all this is going to work. And then to afford something like this, you're going to have to get the loan from the bank. You won't get this loan by yourself. You're going to need a second person to get this loan. In all of these strategies, you really need a dual income scenario going on. And that's either going to be a partner, a family member, a significant other. I just don't know if there's another way where you would qualify for a loan of this much otherwise.
Well, as you say all that, I would argue that if you're a traditional W 2 employee, that's most likely going to have to be the case. But both of us are self employed entrepreneurs. There's more risk that comes with that, but there's also more upside naturally. To be able to afford it yourself, you'd have to be in an entrepreneurial position, at least have a W 2 full time job, and then you have a side hustle bringing in a lot of money as well. So entrepreneurship plays a big role.
That's true. But also keep in mind, like the bank is just going to want to see your tax returns over the last 2 years. And they're going to be like, okay, this is how much he's making. And then they just basically put it into their spreadsheet and they're like, this is the maximum we're going to loan him. There's probably a couple other quirks to that. I know, like, if in some cases, if you have like a documented rental income from the property, they can kind of use that. And I think that leads us into the house hacking conversation on this one. So don't mind me asking, what's your rent right now, your monthly rent?
My monthly rent before utilities, which are baked in, is $14.50 in Denver, Colorado. You could get a place in Denver for around $1,000 a month to rent, but it wouldn't be in this neighborhood, and it would be like kind of like a beater place for sure. So adjusted for how nice I would say my place is with, like, it's got a new kitchen remodel, it's got new appliances. This is probably the best value deal in the entire city. And when I tell people this, they actually agree with me. So $1,500, we'll say.
So I guess the first thing I should mention is, like, from Denver to San Diego, the rent is just going to be more here. Rent for a one bedroom here, minimum is probably $2,500 a month. If you're looking to buy a home, you can compare a $2,500 a month rental to what you're going to pay for owning the home. Maybe it's worth paying $3,500 if you own the home versus $2,500 to rent. So I'm kind of using that for a little perspective here. But this number is not an insurmountable down payment. I mean, this is going to take years to save up, I would imagine, over 2 to 3 years. I think this is like a reasonable amount to save up. Would you agree with that?
I think it's a reasonable amount to save up. It depends on everyone's individual financial circumstance. For me, I would be looking to continually invest in the stock market, maybe even cryptocurrency. Although, of course, we're not trying to give investment advice on this discussion. And then cash out at a good time when I wanted to make this purchase. So I wouldn't be saving it in the bank necessarily, although I would try to have a good amount of money in the bank. It would be tied up in equities, and then I would eventually sell it to pay off the down payment.
Yeah, that makes sense. You just need access to about this much money, wherever the money is. But here's still the issue. Like I was saying, 2,500 is going to be like a rental cost for a one bedroom unit. And here we're going to be paying double to own this property. So I think what you would be doing on something like this, if you really wanted to get into the housing market and you had dual income, you rent out the other bedroom and bathroom. And now somebody is going to be paying for a one bedroom with a bathroom, and you could also like plumb in a kitchenette for them too. And that is going to rent for $1,500. Now, all of a sudden, instead of $5,000, you're down at $3,500 and you own the property. In this particular case, this is actually a two bedroom. So there's a case where you rent both bedrooms, maybe $1,000 each. And now all of a sudden your payment's at $3,100. But now let's talk about what this means if you're going to have a partner in this project. So if you're lucky enough and you have a parent who's going to co-sign with you, that's awesome. In that situation, you're probably still paying the full mortgage and your parent's just on the loan. But in most scenarios, I don't think your mom or dad's going to sign the loan and then also give you 50% of the mortgage. So while they could help you get your foot in the door, you'd still be on the hook for all of this. And in that scenario, you get one or two roommates, and then that kind of drops the number here. So that works. but you got to be lucky enough to have this situation where your parents are going to co-sign on the mortgage. The other scenario is you have a significant other who either you're married to or maybe thinking you're going to, feeling strongly about the relationship. And that's a great situation because now you can take both of your incomes, qualify for the loan, and you have more income coming in than if it's just your income. And the best thing about this is you're presumably going to be living in the same bedroom. And then that still leaves the two vacant bedrooms for two roommates, one or two roommates. And then the third scenario is you have a partner who's like a basically would be a roommate, but they're you have a good relationship with this person. They want to invest in the home, and I think they would consider that like what's called a tenants in common scenario. You're both investing, but the downside of that is now that roommate is going to have their own bedroom, so it leaves you with only bedroom available. I guess the upside is they'd probably split this in half. Now you're paying $2,500 basically. They're paying $2,500. Maybe you rent the other bedroom for $1,000 and you pay $2,000, they pay $2,000, and then you're sharing the equity with them. I think all three of those scenarios could make this work. And the icing on the cake here, from at least from my perspective, first off, it doesn't look like there's too many renovations. It's not the nicest kitchen. It's probably not the nicest. The icing on the cake here is what you do in the future. So after you've lived here for a little while, you've done a couple renovation projects to fix things up, then you gear up in the future and build an ADU or two ADUs back here. And then all of a sudden you can get this thing to almost a cash flow scenario. What do you think about this property, Belly?
I don't think it needs a ton of work. I think you'd probably need to remodel the kitchen, maybe the bathroom. That's probably for the most part what I would want to do in the interior. It does have significant development potential on the lot. Also looks like it's nice. It's next to a park, which I think is cool for just going for walks and stuff. Seems like a good location. You could probably build at least two ADUs and then have two or three more tenants there, get it to cash flow. How far away do you think it is from downtown? Let's say walking distance, because
This
it
is
seems kind of far.
this is probably a 30 or 45-minute walk to Petco Park.
Okay. But you're near the pier over there.
I mean, let me be totally honest with you. This is not the best park. They've made a lot of improvements here, but this park has quite a lot of homeless people in it. This is a brand new through 12 school, but it's not the best school system. You're next to Chicano Park over here, which is a kind of a cool area with a good vibe, and Barrio Logan over here. There's a lot of cool stuff going on here. You do have the trolley here, so you're probably 15-minute walk to the trolley stop, which could take you all different places, but the trolley doesn't go everywhere you'd want it to. And the further you go east in this neighborhood, the more sketchy it gets. You're kind of right at the fringe, which is, I think, reflected in the price of the home. So those are the challenges. You are making some compromises. This is not going to be the San Diego lifestyle that you're going to see on TV. This is going to be the bottom rung of the real estate ladder in San Diego.
I think that was a very informative exercise for not just myself, but anyone watching. My big takeaway is that, and maybe you disagree, I think you will disagree, but that's fine. But for me personally, I think the value proposition of buying a home compared to like when we just looked at it like in 1950 has gone down significantly. This case study we looked at is like the most extreme example because San Diego is so expensive. It's so much more expensive, inflation adjusted. And it's nearly like 10x from when we think about like the golden age of the American dream. And then especially in many of the examples you give of like getting creative and like house hacking and bringing in roommates. For example, 20, 30 years ago, people wanted to move out of the apartments where they had roommates, buy a property so they could finally not have any roommates. Now, for example, I live alone. It would seem like if I wanted to do that, I would be going back in a way of, I'd have to get roommates potentially, which I wouldn't mind, but it would have to be one of my good friends. I wouldn't want to live with like a random person. And I think there's just also the opportunity cost of you could just put money in the stock market and the S&P returns 8 to 12% annually, and then you don't need to do anything technically. So there is value in home ownership. The starter home is going to be downgraded to the condo for my generation, which I'm kind of fine with because I don't want to be doing the development necessarily, and I don't want to be doing the landscaping for sure. So if someone else can take care of all that, I'm cool with it. But that's just the way I see things going. And I think if anything, if people want to get in the housing market, I think it's going to have to be delayed until you're probably like 40 plus, quite honestly.
You definitely bring up some interesting points. Like, are we at a point where housing is reached a price where it just makes more sense to be a permanent renter. I have a client who's in his late 70s and he owns a bunch of rental properties in La Jolla, and they rent for like $4,000 for like a small one bedroom. And like, well, what happens if San Diego becomes a place where nobody can ever buy a home and everybody's just renting? I'm like, we're going to be in this scenario where everybody's renters. Isn't that bad? And he was like, well, that's New York City. So cities just reach a point where people are permanent renters.
There are significant downsides to renting, I will say. You don't want to be a permanent renter because then you kind of get into a situation where you're almost like a serf in a way, like back in the day in Europe. So that's not what you want. The idea is to own property because that's more secure, I would argue.
Yeah.
There are benefits to renting though. Like, for example, if this building burns down, it's not the end of the world for me, you know?
Mhm.
I'll just go somewhere else.
But, if you're comparing how much you can make with your money in the stock market versus how much money you could make in real estate, I think that's pretty speculative, especially the real estate. Like everybody assumes real estate's going to go up and everybody assumes it in San Diego real estate has gone up. But, there are cases where it can crash down. And I think the stock market may be a little bit more stable than real estate. Have we reached an inflection point where your generation doesn't purchase real estate in high cost areas? I'm not sure. From my perspective as an architect, owning the land and having the future development possibility is the most appealing scenario. And that's why the condo was not something I was interested in. Not only with the condo, you don't have any land for future development, but the HOA fees are really a killer. And also just the fact that an HOA can tell me what color I can paint things, like that doesn't sit well with me. So I was
Well, I
really
get that.
opposed to condos. And by the way, I should let you know, like in the 80s, my parents' first property was a condo. And then the condo became a rental. And then eventually they sold the condo and moved into
Yeah.
another house.
That's one of the benefits of the condo. If you get that first, then you can rent it out in the future when you have more money to buy a property. I think it's worth mentioning, though, that number one, we're looking at a place right in the middle of the city. I think a lot of people who are looking to buy their homes are going to probably be looking for something more suburban, especially if they're having a family. And also, with the rise of remote work, there's a big trend, and I don't want to live this type of lifestyle, but with the rise of remote work, there are people who are looking to move out of cities, especially as they get into their late 20s, 30s and have more property, live in a place that's more suburban, and not need the commute. I think the further away you get out of the city, the more affordable, for the most part, these homes should likely become.
It's difficult to say. So, like the area that I showed you, it's close to downtown, so it would be more urban, but it's still a single family home, which is kind of suburban. I guess as the city grows, as San Diego grows, areas that were suburbs become more urban and more dense. I think that's been a big issue. It's a whole different topic, but like people are adding more housing or more units to these properties. There's a big backlash, like the whole NIMBY movement. But you don't want a stagnant city. And if you look back historically, every city basically grows or it kind of dies. That's a whole nother conversation for another podcast.
For
Bailey,
sure.
if I was going to give you advice on what I would do right now if I were you, considering if your mindset is to own a home, first off, I would say save as much money as you can, as fast as you can, because housing prices continue to increase and they're probably increasing faster than you're saving for that down payment. And that's also the reason why I think it's better to put a lower down payment on your first home, even though at 20% down, you'd save a lot of money on your monthly payment and you'd save that PMI insurance. But by the time it takes you to save 20%, home prices are going to be so much higher. So the first thing anybody should do, save their money. The second major advantage as we ran these numbers is having that partner. So kind of critical to making this work the way I showed you today. Then I guess the third thing is homeownership just comes with more maintenance. So going to be doing the landscaping, although in that property it was mostly concrete, so there may not be too much landscaping to do. Doing some weekend projects just kind of comes with the territory. I kind of really enjoy that work, and I know not a lot of people do. But over time, you'll just end up doing the work, or you hire somebody to do the work if you can afford it. And then the little projects around the house, like my cabinet broke the other day, so I just fixed the cabinet. It took 30 minutes. It's not too big of a deal. And if you want to figure out how to do these things, you just go to YouTube and somebody's explaining how to do it.
Well, I think this was very informative. I will say personally, it was informative for me. But we're pretty much at time, so we'll wrap it up here. But I think there's several other offshoots of this main topic we could eventually touch on. So, is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
If you're interested in home ownership, a way to do it and go for it. You have to come up with creative solutions to get into a really challenging market.
All right. Thank you for watching, everyone. We'll be back in about 2 weeks or so. Until then, subscribe to the channel, check out the website, and certainly feel free to reach out if you're interested in a architecture development type project in San Diego.